Good morning. Welcome all to Psychology 12. Today we're going to be continuing with lesson 4, which is recognition, recall, and relearning. So these are 3 R's of memory retrieval. We've previously looked at encoding, we've looked at storage, and now we're going to be looking at the retrieval of memories with these 3 R's. This is a relatively short lesson, and let's jump right on it. So the first R is recognition. In order to store thousands of items in such a way as you find the particular item when you look for it, human memory needs to be efficient and organized. The way it's organized makes recognition easy. Chances are you'll forget my name in a few years after you've graduated, probably even sooner, but if someone said my name in a few years to you, you might recognize it. And so that highlights that we often recognize things even though we don't necessarily wouldn't have remembered them otherwise. This is why multiple choice questions on tests often turn out better results, because the information is there and it's easier to recognize it than it is to just remember it without recognizing it. So the process of recognition is one way that shows us how our memories are organized. Psychologists have kind of been studying how our brain organizes memories, and the way to do that is by looking at how we recognize things. So in the sense that you can recognize a piano regardless of the tune being played, but you can also recognize tunes regardless of what instrument's being used. So one isn't more important than the other one, and they basically can get tagged. When we gain a new memory, it gets tagged and categorized in ways, and the more categories it gets stored under, the more likely you will be to recognize it. So when we're learning something, if we want it to stick really well, we want to get as many categorized or tags along with it as possible so that it gets recognized or recalled a lot easier. Second R is recall. So what's even more remarkable in recognition is our ability to recall information. Recognition is just recognizing something that we see, but recall is actively reconstructing information. So our memories are just stored in our head somewhere, and our ability to recall is to actually build something from that memory. So think about the recall needed to have a conversation. When you're having a conversation, in a split second, you're recalling and you're building words that you've learned previously that didn't necessarily have any connection to your conversation, but you're building these words based on the meanings that you have stored of those words and the thoughts and ideas, and they're all being retrieved and reconstructed at the same time to make sentences. Recall is influenced by the reconstructive processes. So that means our memories can be simplified, enriched, or distorted depending on the individual's experiences, attitudes, or inferences. So what that's saying is our recall isn't always flawless. Sometimes our memories get simplified in the sense that we forget little details. Sometimes they get enriched, meaning we've gained new information and it gets added to memories, or we learn more about something, or we have a memory but we didn't know everything about it, and we learn something new that we can add to something that we already knew. And it could also be distorted, where you think you remember something, then you talk with some friends and they're talking about it in a different way, and your memory might slowly shift over to their way of thinking just because it's what you heard, what you're hearing. So memory isn't fully reliable. So when recalling, we can make the mistake of confabulation, which is when a person remembers something that wasn't stored in their memory. Our brain often fills in gaps to make our memories continuous. So what that means is we don't always remember all the details because we maybe weren't paying attention to them, or they weren't stored properly, and our brain can start filling in information that it thinks is relevant. So it's really efficient in how it does that, and it helps make our memories continuous, but sometimes it can be wrong. And so sometimes we can be wrong without even knowing it. We're very sure we're right about something, and our brain just filled in the extra little bit of information. So one thing I'd like you to do is ask your parents where they were on September 11th. So that's 9/11, 2001. That's when the World Trade Centers were attacked, where some airlines flew into them, and it was a pretty major world event. Very likely they'll remember it in super vivid detail. I know I do, and I was probably like 8 at the time. So I don't have a whole lot of memories, not very many vivid memories anywhere near those ages, but that one specifically, I could tell you exactly where I was, who I was hanging out with, and what the next hours or so. I knew I was biking on this. I know exactly what sidewalk I was biking. The two friends with me, and then we went home to watch it on TV, and it's like super detailed in my mind. And it's a phenomenon called a flashbulb memory. So it's a type of memory that usually involves events that are shocking or emotional on a societal level. So it's on a large scale, a big shocking event where it happens without you trying. Like, I wasn't trying to remember it specifically, but somehow it triggers part of your memory that you need to remember this. So, and every generation can have different flashbulb memories. So most of you probably won't remember September 11 because either you weren't born yet or too young. But there may be other ones in your lifetime that you remember with super vivid detail, and that's what that's called. And then there's also state-dependent learning. State-dependent learning occurs when you recall information easily when you're in the same physiological or emotional state or setting you were when you originally encoded the information. So that's the idea, that you want to get yourself set up to recall in the same setting you were, or emotional state, the same setting or emotional state as you were when you first learn the information. A lot of people like to listen to music when they study, but it's shown over and over in different studies that that's not a good idea. And the reason being is because you can't listen to music when you're writing a test. So if you're listening to music while you're studying, subconsciously you're encoding that information. You're encoding your new learning along with the music. And without that music, when you're trying to recall it, you might have a more difficult time. So you want to, when you're studying, it's a good idea to try set up your information or your encoding in as a test-like scenario as possible, where you have very few distractions. And yeah, so that's also a lot of people, you want to stay seated in the same seat that you normally sit at. At university, the seating shifts around quite a bit, and you may find that ending up at a different seat on a test day, you're having a harder time remembering it. So it's always a good idea to try, if you have to remember some really important stuff, to try get your state of mind or your physical location to as close as possible to how it was when you encoded some information, because it might just be some cues on the side. Maybe there was some certain picture on the wall you were looking at when you memorized a certain fact. Well, that picture on the wall could refresh your mind on what that is. So the third R is relearning. Recall and recognition both measures of declarative memory. So that's like the words you know, the facts, and the timing of different events. Relearning is a measure of both declarative and procedural memory. So it's also used when we're working with memory of the skills you have and the things you can do. And it's the idea that you would likely learn things faster the second time you learn them. So you've probably heard the saying, once you can ride a bike, you can always ride a bike. And because you don't really usually forget how to ride a bike, But some skills over time get worse. And for instance, just information. So say this course here, you're learning all about memory. Well, it's not likely you're in 5 years, if I asked you about this, that you'd remember a whole lot of it. But if you went out and worked for a while, and then in the 2-3 years you went to university and took a psychology course, you would start running into the same information. And you may not remember it fully, but you're going to learn it super fast because you've already learned it before. So the memories are still in there somewhere. And relearning is the idea that when you're learning something you've previously learned, those connections are already partially there and they come back a lot faster. So you can, rather than building fully new connections, you're just massaging these older muscles and these older connections that you already have. And that's it for the retrieval stage. So yeah, just the 3 R's: recognition, recall, and relearning. And our next lesson will be on forgetting things. See you then.